Yeah. Hi, Dryden. Nice meeting you, Simon. They have to wear the headset? Okay, so everybody has to wear headsets? Okay, good. Okay, good morning. A very warm welcome to our session on decarbonizing buildings and building roadmaps. So, first of all, my name is Dieter Moppold. I'm co-chair of the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee, and I'm very excited to be here today with you. And this work is very meaningful to us as a Technology Executive Committee of UNFCCC, and because we also have in our work program buildings, and it's very important for the overall global decarbonization agenda. And just logistical note for hearing well, you can have headphones, and it's recommended to have headphones, so for better audibility. So please use the headphones, and they will be distributed. So today's workshop, first of all, we would like to address the importance of decarbonization buildings, which are very important, 37% of global emissions. And we know it's a daunting task to get to zero emissions for the building sector with so much building activity going on globally. And very importantly, I think we address also the roadmaps of buildings and also roadmaps of building materials today together. So the linkages between the carbon footprint of buildings, but also the materials. I think it's a very important aspect. And we have to combine it and get it together. So hopefully we hear more about that today. And also we have the very exciting launch of the Global ABC's roadmap on step-by-step guide on roadmaps for buildings. So very excited to hear about this. And then, of course, we would like to give guidance on the upcoming NDCs, so basically also how countries and how you can foster decarbonizations going ahead, and would like to get you all engaged on that. So we have, I think, fantastic speakers and a fantastic panel. So please be actively engaged. And first of all, I would like to welcome Gulnara Rol from UNEP. So Gulnara is heading the secretariat of the Global ABC, and she is also heading the cities unit of UNEP. So over to you, Gulnara.
Thank you so much, Ditram, and thank you so much for you all coming together. I think we, many of you we see again and again. So I think this is really great to have this strong network focusing on the solutions. I mean, I repeat again and again, I'm really so excited to have this discussions all here focusing on very concrete solutions. So I'm head of the Secretariat of the Global Alliance Building Constructions, which you know that is bringing over 340 organizations together from different stakeholders. We also, just also heads up that next Wednesday we have a building ministerial meeting. It will be, so we hope also you join and listen in to it. It will be also inauguration of the Intergovernmental Council on Building and Climate, which was launched with the Declaration de Chaillot in Paris in March this year. So I think all this institutional structure, but also our great cooperation with many of your organizations are very, very important to really push forward the work we are doing. I just maybe to flag, I mean, I don't want to bring all the numbers because it's like, trying to tell to those who already preach the same topic of the decarbonization of the building sector. But just to mention that we launched 2 weeks ago the UNEP emissions report. Also, of course, you know about the global status report on buildings, which was launched earlier this year. And as you know, that all the statistics, the data, information shows that we are not reaching the goal at the moment. We are not reaching the goal. We are not, decreasing the gap between the objectives of the building sector decarbonization and what actually reality on ground. So, and in this, from this point of view, definitely the roadmap as a strategic documents are extremely important. They're important because they allow us to combine different technical solutions. But technical solutions exist, and during these 2 weeks, so we hear about many exciting technical solutions about addressing operational carbon, and we know that on operational carbon we see the decrease in the emissions, we see the increase in the energy efficiency. However, on the embodied carbon, there is much more work to be done. And this is where we're actually working a lot on the materials and also on the whole whole cycle analysis and whole cycle approach, life cycle approach for the built environment. So we hear a lot about the technical solutions, and it's very exciting to see that on the materials, on the equipment, on the planning, there are so many technical materials exist. But what we still need to see more is cooperation and partnerships, because we need to develop stronger cooperation between the national, regional, national, local, global level. And this is, I think, at Global ABC we are trying to do. We just established a subnational action group. We're also engaging the local governments. And this is what we're also trying to kind of promote in the roadmaps as well, engagement of the whole society approach. And so we're looking forward to discuss the roadmaps as a strategic solutions, as a strategic way of looking at the built environment decarbonization, but also in the way of how we organize data, but also, I think data also very, very important, but also how we organize the partnership around this, bringing together the different levels of governance, but also different expert organizations, civil society, to ensure that it's really, we have a very inclusive approach. Thank you. Dieter, back to you.
Many thanks, Gulnara, and exciting to hear how Global ABC is bringing construction and buildings roadmaps together and all the partners, and we will hear more about the details of the roadmap later. But before, I would like to hand over to Rachel McCormick. She's Director General of the International and Intergovernmental Affairs, Natural Resources of Canada. And Rachel will introduce to us the launch of the Canada Green Building Strategy. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you so much for the introduction, Gulnara, and to the Global ABC for convening us today. On behalf of the Government of Canada, it's really an honor to be here to present our Green Building Strategy. We hope that these efforts and those of other countries that are here today contribute to advancing sustainability in the built environment. We know that decarbonizing the building sector is a multifaceted challenge that requires the collaboration of many stakeholders. This needs to be leveraged by government policies and regulations and private sector investments and innovation to drive the market towards more sustainable practices and innovations. We know that buildings have long life cycles, and reducing emissions while improving resilience to climate change necessitates significant investments. These investments require a strategic approach with multi-year planning and performance measurement to ensure desired outcomes. A comprehensive approach requires addressing emissions across the entire building life cycle with practical and tested solutions. It requires setting ambitious short, medium, and long-term goals that will help us achieve our emission reduction targets. I'd really like to commend the work of UNOPS and the UNEP-hosted Global ABC in developing global and regional roadmaps. These frameworks guide governments at all levels towards creating zero-emission, efficient, and resilient buildings. They support the entire value chain of actors by establishing a common language to align objectives and target actions and a shared vision for change. Canada's approach is aligned in many ways with these global frameworks. We have national strategies and regulatory frameworks to help integrate actions and set the path for change, while standards and codes help to gradually drive up performance. We are also investing in capacity building and engagement to help drive demand and support adoption and implementation. Since 2016, our government has invested significantly, over $20 billion, in building decarbonization initiatives. Ambitious building codes, stringent equipment standards, and incentives for retrofits have driven progress. More transformative change is needed to reach Canada's climate goals and improve the building stock. And that's why in March of 2022, we released our 2030 emissions reduction plan, which was a sector-by-sector approach to reach Canada's target of cutting emissions by 40% by 2030, laying the foundation for net zero by 2050. That plan built on previous climate action plans. In July of this year, after consultations across the country, the Canada Building Strategy was unveiled to the public. It aims to build the carbonization and resiliency of Canada's building stock while supporting affordability, job creation, and economic growth. There are 3 priorities. First, accelerate retrofits. Second, build green and affordable from the start. And third, shape the building sector of the future. On accelerating retrofits, more than 2/3 of the buildings that will be standing in 2050 in Canada have already been built. That means we need a dramatic scale up of the retrofits needed to achieve a retrofit rate for existing homes and buildings of around 3% a year. On building green and affordable from the start, we know that we need to design and build structures in a way that is sustainable and affordable. We need to consider the whole building life cycle through high-performance codes and standards for low-carbon materials. This will help us achieve our objective of faster and lower costs rather than retrofitting and electrifying later. Third, building the sector for the future. Given that fossil fuel heating is the largest source of emissions in the building sector, we're focusing on electrification of space and water heating through the development and deployment of innovative technologies and through strategies and regulations that ensure an abundant supply of clean electricity. At a time when we are facing challenges with affordability, the Canada Green Building Strategy aims to save Canadians money, create jobs, and provide economic opportunities that a clean and sustainable economy can present. New investments of nearly $1 billion were recently announced. Much of this funding will go to the Canada Greener Homes Affordability Program. This will help Canadians undertake retrofits, adopt heat pumps, and build up the green workforce. Other actions will support foundational initiatives on building code development, data, surveys, as well as a national approach to home energy labeling. To advance the strategy, we're leveraging the federal government's investment and purchasing power. Our new Buy Clean policy approach aims to create a market draw for low-carbon construction materials, designs, and technologies. By doing so, we aim to drive down their costs and make them more widely available, expanding economic opportunities for Canadian industries across domestic and international markets. We're also working with industry to support the adoption of low-carbon construction materials, such as low-emission concrete. In November 2022, we worked with the Cement Association of Canada to launch a joint roadmap to net zero carbon concrete to position ourselves as an industry and global leader. It commits us to reducing more than 15 megatons of GHG emissions by 2030, with ongoing reductions annually of more than 4 megatons and in the production of cement and concrete by 2050. This will be achieved through a suite of funding programs, strategic finance and tax measures, policies and regulations, and R&D, providing incentives to decarbonize the sector while remaining globally competitive. Additionally, we are focused on modernizing energy efficiency regulations to respond to the evolving online marketplace and cross-border regulatory landscape. This includes establishing critical energy efficiency improvements for energy-using products and introducing a regulatory framework to phase out oil heating system in new construction by 2028. We are working on important coordination and convening across the government sector, as well as with industry. We have a lot of cross-sectoral plans in Canada, and so we have to think about how they all connect. This includes our Sustainable Jobs Plan. We know that we need a skilled workforce of the future and that this could be an obstacle to achieving our energy efficiency and green building goals. We also know that cross-border collaboration is important, and that's why we proudly support multiple international initiatives and urge other nations to join us. One key initiative we endorse is the Buildings Breakthrough, which aims to make zero-emission, climate-resilient buildings the standard by 2030. We're excited to work with global partners, including initiative leaders France and Morocco, 29 national governments, the European Commission, to drive forward our shared 2025 priorities. Together, we're committed to creating impactful change in the built environment, helping drive global decarbonization. Alongside our colleagues in the UAE, Canada is committed to co-chairing the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough, a multilateral initiative that aims to strengthen collective action to accelerate decarbonization of the global cement and concrete sector. The goal of this work is clear: make near-zero emission cement the preferred choice in global markets, with efficient use and near-zero emission cement production established and growing in every region by 2030. So far, we have 12 member countries from North America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and beyond, and we'd really love to see other countries join in this active initiative. We're also proud to support the Déclaration de Chaillot, a ministerial declaration that sets a framework for international cooperation on buildings. We're pleased to see the official launch of the Intergovernmental Council for Buildings and Climate at a high-level roundtable on green construction and energy-efficient buildings on November 20th. As a long-standing member of Global ABC, we proudly support its mission of zero-emission, efficient, and resilient buildings and construction sector. Our thanks to UNEP, Global ABC, for their leadership in this regard. You are driving the work that needs to be done. These collective efforts, guided by comprehensive roadmaps and national strategies, are crucial to achieving our goal. Thank you.
First of all, congratulations to Canada for the fantastic strategy addressing comprehensively the building sector, both retrofits and new buildings, and also combining it with the decarbonization of materials. And I know I work with Canada on IDDI together, so it's fantastic to see Canada driving that also internationally forward, and also going ahead as a government in green building and on green public procurement. So that's fantastic to see that, and also thanks for your support of Global ABC. So next, I would like to give the word to Dr. Samantha Stratton-Short. She is presenting to us the roadmap, the step-to-step guide to develop climate action for buildings and construction. And yeah, very excited to have you. Over to you, Samantha.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me all right. Excellent. So thank you for the introduction, Dieter, and thank you to UNEP and Global ABC for inviting us to speak about the work that we've been doing on the roadmaps. First of all, as it's just been highlighted, buildings are pivotal to decarbonizing and promoting resilience in our cities. However, we are off track, and this isn't due to a lack of technology. The building sector is one of the few where the technology for full decarbonization already exists. The real gap is in action. Our cities, buildings, and homes can no longer follow business as usual design. We need to shift from plans on paper to concrete actions worldwide and across all levels. The building sector is complex with multiple stakeholders and layers, each playing a critical role in the paradigm shift to reimagine how we live. So at COP29, energy efficiency is central to all our conversations, yet only 26% of countries currently enforce mandatory energy performance codes, making advanced concepts like whole life carbon assessment and circularity at a national level a distant reality. Achieving zero carbon buildings must transition from being a best practice to the standard approach. The Climate Action Pathway for Human Settlements of the Marrakesh Partnership stated originally that for 2025, all countries, cities, and regions should have a comprehensive net zero carbon roadmap for the built environment with a clear policy trajectory in place, aiming to halve the built environment emissions. We have now missed this deadline. That is why promoting guidance on how to support governments to establish clear plans, actions, and priorities to set a decisive agenda is critical for the years ahead. I think I've hit the wrong button. There we go. Great. Okay, so the question is, how can national decision makers make meaningful progress? So the Global Alliance on Buildings and Construction, hosted by UNEP and funded by the Germany's Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, have partnered with UNOPS and UN Habitat to address this challenge. Our sector needs greater ambition to establish clear targets and actions for the building sector within nationally determined contributions and shift from measurement to tangible implementation. As part of this drive for ambition, more than 70 countries signed the Déclaration de Chaillot in March 2024, committing to international cooperation to accelerate the transition to zero emissions building sector. These tools are designed to help countries develop their roadmaps and achieve priority actions. So at UNOPS, yep, good. We are honored to have contributed in this process in the development of the methodologies and the guidance that support policymakers and leaders in achieving net zero emissions by 2050 in the buildings and construction sectors. So today, in partnership with the Global ABC, UNEP, UN Habitat, and with the invaluable insights and contributions from the International Advisory Group of Roadmap Experts, we are proud to launch the Climate Action Roadmaps for Buildings and Construction Toolkit. This toolkit is designed to drive decarbonization, resilience, and inclusion in the built environment. The toolkit provides step-by-step guidance, a set of tools, templates, and video resources to help create climate roadmaps at national and subnational levels. Additionally, as a deeper look into materials and circularity and design, we will also be presenting the National Circularity Assessment Framework for Buildings that will be launched on the 19th here at the Buildings Pavilion to focus on the role of rethinking the way we design our built environment and use materials to reduce the triple planetary crisis. But what are the climate action roadmaps for buildings? So this is a methodology that aims to assess holistically the building sector, taking decision makers through a thorough assessment of the building sector with 4 objectives: zero embodied and operational carbon, adaptation, and inclusion. So the framework identifies 5 action areas. Action area 1 is the strategic priorities. 2, spatial and urban development. Then new buildings, existing buildings, and the construction supply chain. So the guidance adopts a collaborative, step-by-step approach across 7 stages, from mobilization and stakeholder engagement to analyzing the current status of the building sector and defining key goals and objectives. This framework empowers governments and stakeholders to set their own targets, develop action plans for implementation, and establish monitoring practices. The guidance covers a qualitative and quantitative assessment of the building sector. It includes physical environment, the building's analysis with indicators and metrics to achieve targets in the following years, and 2030 to 2050 strategies, and a qualitative assessment, a rapid questionnaire to be filled in by experts to understand the status. We also identified data gaps as one of the key challenges, as well as for previous roadmaps to be able to understand the starting point and develop roadmaps and measurable objectives. That is why the current tools aim to provide resources to measure quantitative and qualitative performance. So, for example, as part of the quantitative assessment of the physical environment, the buildings we have developed a projections database and dashboard. The tool enables us to assess the current status of buildings' portfolios, identify gaps, and address challenges in reaching our climate goals, helping close the gap to the 1.5 degree target. Countries can use this digital tool to analyze their current status and project future trends with data-backed insights. Key metrics include current and projected population trends, building portfolio status, emissions, and resilience indicators. This provides a comprehensive view to guide effective climate action planning. We have also developed a holistic rapid questionnaire to assess the performance of each enabling domain that drives change in the building sector. This includes understanding the institutional processes in place, available financial resources and funding, and the mechanisms for promoting knowledge and technical capacities. By evaluating performance and identifying gaps across these key action areas, we can set clear targets and actions to foster a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive building sector. Okay. So there we just have some examples of the roadmaps. Ooh. Yeah, you've got it, okay. Of the roadmaps where we've been working in Bangladesh and Ghana and Senegal, and we thank the countries for working with us on this. Finally, there's just a lag. We invite you to learn more about these initiatives and to reach out to UNOPS or the Global ABC to collaborate on advancing climate action, sustainable resilience, and inclusion. So together we can drive a meaningful change for a sustainable future. Thank you.
Great, many thanks, Samantha, and outlining us this hands-on, step-to-step guide, which hopefully all the countries make use of, and with the important starting point, getting first to mandatory building codes, and then bringing all the elements together from circularity to embodied carbon to operational carbon. Speaking about embodied carbon, I'm very pleased to give the word now to Anne de Keukeleer. She is Executive Director of the Center of Worldwide Sustainable Construction at the EPFL, and she will address the importance of roadmaps for construction materials, especially I think cement, and I think it's very exciting because these materials play like 50% cement and steel of building carbon embodied footprint. So very excited to hear more about this from you, and over to you.
Thank you. Yes, it's working. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation from Global ABC. I will talk about the net zero concrete and cement accelerated roadmap in Tanzania. We have to know that this initiative has been financed, co-financed by GCCA and ClimateWorks, and we are working with the other partners, and I will explain more during my presentation. First, who is EPFL? EPFL is the number 10 ranking top university worldwide in materials sciences. It's somehow a unique university where we have different disciplines all together under one roof. We have the civil engineering, architectures, material science, and environmental engineers also under one roof, so collaboration and innovation can happen all together. That was just a parenthesis. This is not new for you, but this one I stole it from Architecture 2030. It's true, 42% of the emissions comes from the built environment. And when you look at the bottom on the right, you see the material. We have there the cement and the steel coming into the built environment. But let's come back to what is the difference between operational emissions and embodied emissions. Operational emissions comes from the operation of the building. Embodied emissions comes from the construction, the repair, maintenance, and the end of life, which means that embodied emissions are upfront emissions. Why it's important? It will be important for Africa because the upfront will happen now, which means that's why it's very urgent to tackle this. And we think with all the technologies of energy efficiency, we think that the embodied emission will be will represent a bigger part than in terms of emissions compared to operational emissions. So, we know those two quotes, one New York City's every month, otherwise. But this will not happen in the global south. It will happen mostly in Africa and emerging countries. That's why we need to tackle this. We know that nearly 3/4 of the building materials is cement, concrete. So a tendency to look at the volume of this material worldwide is interesting to look at. You can see that China has tipped here and is now in the decreasing slope because China has already built nearly everything. So what is the next region and country to look at? This is Africa, Northeast Asia, Latin America. And that's where we need to focus because that's where the upfront emission will happen. For this roadmap, we followed the GCCA roadmap approach, a roadmap that was endorsed and created by GCCA. And not GCCA is the cement association that regroups worldwide cement producers. But it's not only an association; it's a CEO-driven organization. So we will tackle every lever, and we did that in Tanzania as a country. We looked at every lever, and one of the top levers is the design of the building. How do we build? Second is the efficiency in concrete. How do we produce concrete? And there was a very good example of what happened and what we encounter in Africa, which is totally different than in the global north. Then we will go on efficiency of production of low carbon cement, and then we go down to efficiency of production, and the delta was carbon capture, utilization and storage, because it's somehow the last option the industry has. The roadmap, how we create it, is that when we go to a country to do the roadmap, we try to have, a collaboration with the public and the private, which means that we bring the government, the industry government, we bring the cement industry, concrete industry, but also others like architects, like construction companies together in the room in order to discuss what has to be discussed for the built environment in this country. At the end, we don't have only a quantitative roadmap, we also have some recommended policy enablers in order to activate and to accelerate this decarbonization. And we also come up with investment proposal, what is needed to invest in order to accelerate this path. Since 2021, GCCA already made many roadmaps. A lot are already published, or near completion, but we still have some to do. We reached somehow nearly 50% finished and published, and a lot is ongoing, and we are looking forward to continue. But now let's look at Africa specifically. There, we finished the roadmap in Tanzania, and it was really a lesson learned roadmap exercise. Many other countries are following up. Morocco is also done, and Egypt near completion. So let's go to the nitty-gritties. This is somehow the Tanzania roadmap. If you look on the left, this was the situation. The first column is the situation of today. The second column is what is expected as building until 2050. You see the second arrow is much bigger because we need to build, because there is a huge need of building requirements of infrastructure because population is growing very fast. The first three decarbonization levers were somehow difficult to have in the countries, meaning construction companies don't have a lot of knowledge of how to build leaner, and that's where we need to enter. Second is how to make better concrete. We have to understand that in Africa, majority, nearly 70%, is informal markets. They are using bag cement. They are making concrete on the ground, which means that they put a bit more water. Oops, I have to add a bit of cement. Oops, it's a bit too much. And the formula is not stable. So that's where we need to improve how to make concrete. And we may not bring them directly to the industrial, beautiful concrete manufacturers that we have in the global north, because it's quite expensive. And we need to bring this whole informal market of self-construction people into the path towards more industrialized concrete. And this is key to have. The third lever of decarbonization is low carbon cement. So there we can have a lot of impact also. And then they see the potential there, because it's even a big success with LC3 cement, which is calcined clay cement, reducing 40% versus OPC. Why? Because there is no fly ash in Africa. There is no slag as a cementitious material. What do we have? We have clay. So there is a huge potential, but it's an upfront investment that we need to solve also. And the other levers, which is efficiency in the kiln, electrification, not of the kiln, but solar energy for electricity requirements. And then you see totally on the right, we wrote delta. We didn't write carbon capture because we think there is a huge potential before. That's why we didn't name it carbon capture. It is a first roadmap, but it was a good lesson learned, and that's where we need to go back and really working on all those levers. Here, what was the collaboration? We had here an incredible collaboration with UNCTCN collaborating with us in order to reach the public, the authorities, having them on board, which somehow facilitated because this roadmap was funded by philanthropy and by GCCA. Is when you come to a country and you said, I want to do the roadmap for you, but it will cost you so much, they will say, oh, thank you. But when you approach a country saying, we will do it for you, and we give all our time for you, they really are welcoming, and they really want to embrace this homework together with us. So this private collaboration is very, very important. CTCN was facilitating a lot. Then GCCA was facilitating a lot with the industry, bringing all the industry around the table and all the government around the table at the same time during the same workshops. And then EPFL also facilitates with all the research and coordination, and that's why the university also wants to bring the knowledge sharing and the university collaboration with Africa. And I will finish as those would be the next step we really need to go. Continue the roadmap in Africa, bringing new solutions that we don't use in Global North for concrete, how to bring the whole informal sector a bit further in their journey and learning what is sustainability. And what we understood also is that sustainability can be a choice, but it may not be more expensive. So we need to find solution that brings better concrete, low carbon concrete at the same price as now. So hope it was helpful. Thank you.
Many thanks, Anne, and congratulations to your great work and your roadmaps. I think as a representative of the technology mechanism here, I'm also very pleased to hear about your great collaboration with CDCN, UNEP CDCN. I think this is fantastic, and I think especially the detailed work you do in the countries. And as we also know from Europe, basically decarbonizing operational emissions is going ahead well. Somehow, but the construction is the harder part now, which is coming up now. But we have globally to address it now, in order to achieve by 2050 or earlier, hopefully, zero emissions. And it's also good to see that there are low-hanging fruits like LC-free cement, which is available for countries. I think also increasingly affordable, or as even at negative costs, so that's fantastic. So with this, I'd like to invite our panel here on stage. So we have a very good lineup of panel speakers. So I would like to welcome Simon McWhirter. Please, Simon. So Simon is working in the UK Green Building Council, and deputy head, I think, and you have like 30 years of experience in building, so it's very good to have your hands-on experience here. And then we have Audrey Nugent. So Audrey is leading the is Global Advocacy and Campaigns Director of the World Green Building Council. So we have the local Green Building Council in the UK, but then Audrey bringing it globally. And then we have also, Anne, please also come on the stage. So, and we have, so I think, so that's here. So I would like to start maybe first with you, Simon. So Simon, you have launched in UK the Whole Life Carbon Roadmap and also a resilience roadmap. Could you tell us about your experiences in developing those roadmaps and bringing the different elements we were speaking here together?
Yeah, certainly, and thanks very much for having me. As has been said, we've developed two roadmaps over the last couple of years. One is a whole life carbon roadmap, and one is a climate resilience roadmap. But they both had the same core objective, which was about developing a common vision and a trajectory for national government and for our domestic industry to follow to get us to that net zero and resilient space by 2030. It was actually under a project that World Green Building Council pulled together that we did our whole life carbon roadmap. And it was very much a collaborative exercise with met with about 100 companies from across the UK industry and UK government. And what that did was set out a set of policy requirements and industry behaviours to get us to that 2050 net zero point. So it set out a very stepwise plan of actions that were required to get us there. And we actually broke that industry work down into 14 subsectors. So design or supply chain manufacturers or developers could understand what their pathway was. Unfortunately, we published that in 2021 at COP26. Unfortunately, we had a fairly intransigent government at the time, and they made very little progress over the last 3 years. The consequence being, obviously, that the trajectory to get to net zero, the end point doesn't change, so the curve just got steeper. So it's a much harder challenge now than it was 3 years ago when we did that first roadmap. We have a new government, obviously, a few months ago, who seem to be somewhat warmer to our agenda, and we hope that that's all going to change. But what we realised was we very much needed to mirror that whole life carbon process and look at climate adaptation and resilience for the UK's built environment. And really that was about plugging a knowledge gap. The chief exec, or the previous chief exec of our Committee for Climate Change in the UK, called climate adaptation domestically the Cinderella of the climate activity in the UK, sitting in a corner, unloved, under-resourced, unfunded. And that's very much where it's been. And actually, one of the things that surprised us when we developed the Climate Resilience Roadmap over the last year for the UK was a heck of a lot of the work has been about raising awareness, raising the level of understanding about what needs done, and only then have we been able to look at developing the action plans, again, for government and for industry to get us to that 2050 resilient built environment point for the UK. And I guess, obviously this is really crucial that we've got those twin products, the whole life carbon roadmap and the resilience roadmap, because when we look at what the Buildings Breakthrough has set out of near zero resilient buildings being the new normal by 2030, that's a pretty darn tough target to hit. And actually, again, we have pockets of really great knowledge in the UK about how to do those things, but it's not widespread knowledge. It's not right across the sector. So part of the objective of those roadmaps is around knowledge sharing and really demystifying and helping companies and government navigate through that process to get us to that sort of magical end point of a net zero, fully adapted built environment for the UK.
Great, many thanks. Already from your experiences from UK experience, if I would like to go to the global experience. Audrey, can you tell us something about your work, what you do in your 4 countries, and how do you get this action on a global level?
So hi everyone. So I'm Audrey. So obviously working for the World Green Building Council. So we have a community of over 75 green building councils working all around the world. And our membership actually covers 65% of global GDP and 72% of built environment emissions. We actually have quite a large reach in that regard. And what we are seeing, I think particularly this year, is there's a huge amount of political momentum, which I think many of us will agree was long overdue for the building sector. So we had the declaration of the SHIO, the Buildings Breakthrough. We're also, beginning to see good stuff coming out of the European Commission with regards to whole life carbon. So all of these things I think are really driving that ambition. And now it's time, to Gulnara's point earlier, how do we match that global ambition with local action? And really that's the USP of our network, because we're able to connect what we need to do at the global level, and then the network that they have locally can deliver on that. So for us, we've just agreed a new kind of strategic direction for the next couple of years. And a real big focus of that is going to be on that road mapping process. And the reason is because we've learned the lesson that it's a very valuable process to develop and co-develop these roadmaps in a way that brings industry together and marries that ambition that we can see in industry with government action and how that can be delivered. And to the point that Simon made regarding the Building Life project, for us that was a really, really good learning curve. So Building Life is basically a project that we ran with our European network, and the focus was how do you actually integrate whole life carbon, so looking at the operational and the embodied and bringing that into the the policy framework in Europe. So at the European level, we developed and co-created with all of these stakeholders working across Brussels, so representing cement, concrete, steel, the membership bodies there, bringing in our industry partners, convening all of those and figuring out, okay, where do we want the European Commission to go and how do we get there? And that was really powerful because the Commission were able to see that all of these membership bodies, industry, GBCs across Europe were coming together and saying, we believe that we can deliver this ambition and that we can implement it. And that was really crucial. So we're able to get that over the line. So this year we've seen whole life carbon being introduced into the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And I do think it speaks to the strength of the network that we're able to convene. And then to Simon's point, there is 12 green building councils working at the national level, focusing on how they bring their industry together to facilitate that whole life carbon. So that for us really taught us that, you know, we are able to move the needle by bringing people together and demonstrating that we can implement. And that's what we want to now bring to our global network as well. But we're also conscious, you know, that not every single market is ready for a roadmap. So we have a theory of change that will also be looking at, you know, if there isn't that readiness there for a roadmap, we can create a readiness framework. So creating the kind of enabling conditions to get us there. And then the last thing I should say, because there's lots to say and I'm sure we'll have lots of times for discussion, but the NDCs, I think that's a really important point. The NDCs need to be really profiling the action we need to see in buildings. And I think we really need, we're working on a project that is basically going to enable us to assess how the NDCs are in terms of buildings and where there's gaps between policy frameworks and the ambition in the NDCs. And I think that process will pull out where we need to see action. And I think that could be another kind of starting point or entry point for looking at how we can use those roadmaps and the excellent assets that Global ABC have and others that we can build on. So I think there's a lot to be excited about to move towards implementation now.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I think especially the NDCs is very timely because countries are about to update their NDCs to going NDC 3.0. So I think it's time now to get that in. Yeah, and from I think you have this great experience, and we see that, you know, roadmaps are even like developed here in Azerbaijan. We heard from you. It's fantastic to see the cement roadmap. I think when I saw it right on your so. How do you see that roadmaps for like whole building roadmaps and construction roadmaps and material roadmaps? How to see that? How do you see the challenges? How can that come together? Yeah.
Good questions. I think those two roadmaps should be integrated into each other. The cement and concrete roadmap, even if we said cement is high emissions, etc., it still represents more than 80% of the material, and it will stay. And we have to tackle the 80% now and as soon as possible. So bringing the cement and concrete roadmap within the building roadmap of each country is mandatory, because the sooner we tackle cement standards, the sooner we tackle building codes, how to build differently, leaner, and also quality, because we may not continue building and having collapses of building, because it's not always materials. Sometimes it's always the way we build. So we need to solve that, and very quickly. So having cement and concrete roadmaps integrated in the building will be the starting point to really enter into the topic and really decarbonize this upfront, and then also the rest. So I think it's essential.
Very good. So we heard now many presentations, a lot of good points in the discussions. So I would just like to open the discussion also from the floor. For any input. I think we have a great audience here also, so please, if you have any questions to the speakers, please.
Hello and kia ora. I'm Emily from New Zealand. I work for an architecture practice. I'm really interested in the NDCs and how, or like any ideas on what those could look like in terms of actions that countries could do to make them. Oh, she doesn't have headphones, but what an NDC action could look like from the built environment at a national level.
I didn't get it.
A question about NDCs. I can start and then. Yeah, so for me, I mean, I'm quite excited about NDCs at the moment, which might be a bit nerdy, but at the moment, the NDCs that have been put forward by government are putting us on a track to between 2.5 to 2.9 degrees of global warming. And we all know buildings are responsible for nearly 40% of emissions. So unless we're seeing really strong policy action for buildings, we're not going to close that gap to 1.5 degrees. So I think it's really important that from what I can see in the work that we're doing, so we've basically just set up a project that's called like the NDC scorecard for sustainable buildings, if you look at our website. And what we're going to be doing is working with GBCs in different regions to understand what types of policies would work in different regions to close that gap to 1.5 degrees. But from what we're seeing kind of in the preliminary research on that, and I think most people here will probably agree, what we need to see in an NDC is there a, is there an overall carbon budget? Is there then a target for buildings within that budget? And then what types of policies are there in terms of energy efficiency, like electrification or fossil fuel free? If you look at the IEA's report, those are the two biggest levers to get us to a decarbonised built environment up to 2050. Upfront emissions, obviously very important. Whole life carbon, if that's the way you tackle embodied in your country. And then also really can't overlook the resilience aspect in the NDCs as well. So trying to look at those in a more equitable manner, because when we speak to GBCs who are based in the global south, they're obviously concerned about the mitigation aspect, but also quite rightfully, challenging that we also need to be treating resilience in the same manner. And I think just bringing that kind of equilibrium will be really important. And I think the other thing that I feel quite strongly about with the NDCs is, I think what I'm seeing and hoping this week anyways is we're getting a lot of, there's a lot of sessions on NDCs. There seems to be a lot of buy-in for their importance and what we might see next year. But an NDC isn't going to be implemented just by being written on a piece of paper. Is that NDC and the ambition in that NDC, is it being matched in the national policy framework, in the regulatory framework, in the, cooling strategy for a particular country? We need to be connecting the dots between the NDC, the policy framework, and then actually, to Gulnara's point as well, like what's happening at the subnational level. And unless the NDCs are doing that, we're not going to be able to move that the dial. And I think then that's when, the GBCs who are working at the local level and the organisations that they convene, it's up to you guys for implementation.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. I'd just add to that, bringing it back to the roadmaps, I guess. When I said about both the resilience and whole life carbon roadmap, part of the job there is about helping our stakeholders, whether they're political or industry, to understand the stepwise trajectory needed to get us there. So a lot of it's about providing confidence to government that when we say the built environment can do a lot of the heavy lifting in delivering your NDC commitment, and we're working with you to deliver the pathway for action. So it's about giving information, communicating that, and helping give that confidence to act. And it's not just at that national level. So for instance, with our climate resilience roadmap, we're going to have quite a lot of tools there for local governments to use to act upon. So that won't just we've got maps analysing the whole of the UK and looking at climate sensitivity for the warmer, wetter future we've got coming with much more unpredictable events. But it doesn't just map the climate risk, it maps that on a social level as well in terms of vulnerable communities. So local MPs or local city leaders will be able to see exactly what the climate is coming down the track at them, and it'll map that against the vulnerable communities in their area so they can take very hyper-local targeted responses to act. So through the roadmaps, we're trying to give those both very broad-based macro-level understandings for the pathway for NDC ambition, and also hyper-local targeting of action for local authorities, because the economy's in challenging states, so we need to be as precise as we can be with our responses.
Okay.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, everybody who make a speech. Satoru Mizuguchi, freelance journalist from Japan. I understand the buildings and the construction sector constitutes nexus of mitigation and adaptation policies. So my question is, is there any good NDC or national policy to integrate the mitigation and adaptation in the building and construction sector? And this is the first question. The second question is, do you know what kind of issues or topics are discussed on the buildings and the construction sector in the negotiations? Thanks.
I'll not hog the mic, so I'll pass the others in a second. But I would just say that at a general level, of 195 countries involved in the negotiation process, I think it's about 19 that specifically reference buildings as part of the solution in NDCs. And Audrey will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think only 3 specifically have net zero directed building codes embedded in it. So we've got to get that into 195 commitments effectively, for this all to work. So it's a very big hill to climb, but I'll let Audrey.
Yeah, you got the stat right. Yeah, it's 3 that mention that definition, and then I think there is an increase in the number of NDCs that mention buildings, but in terms of the depth and ambition, it's nowhere near enough to get us where we need to be. So we need to see kind of more targeted action and more specifics in that. I think that will be really important, especially because coming out of the UAE consensus last year, there was talk about the need for sector-specific NDCs. In terms of the negotiations, that is a hill, I think, as a community, we still need to climb in terms of getting buildings into that in a really robust manner. But I think actually the collaborations that we're seeing this year between like organizations like Global ABC, like you guys, GCCA, others who are here today, will be really important to get it on the agenda. But what has happened this year was buildings and cities were part of what's known as the Mitigation Work Programme. So that, what I'm hearing, I went to a briefing quite randomly in the Australian Pavilion yesterday where the negotiators were giving a debrief to the Australian delegation, so I snuck in. And they are trying to push, as negotiators, they said, for buildings to be kind of part of that response and mitigation. But, if you're speaking to other negotiators for other countries, I would encourage them to push for it too, because I think it's really important we get at that profile, because that then, look at last year, we had the energy efficiency target and the renewables, and now you hear people talking about that quite a lot. So if we can get that for buildings, like you were saying yesterday, it's like an anchor point, and then we can move that forward collectively together. But yeah, there's a lot more to do there.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing elements coming forward like energy efficiency, renewable, and then we have the storage emerging here at the COP. And from the technology side, we also push decarbonization of hard-to-abate industries, which is steel and cement, which is also a great element of this. Yeah, so, yeah. You also want to respond?
No,
Yeah.
just for the NDC, correct. We also don't have enough correct NDC by country in order to really reduce and having even bigger chapter of what is in the NDC for the industries. So we need a lot of improvement there, and we need to tackle that very quickly.
Maybe quickly, Audrey, also to you. You spoke about connecting the dots. So how important do you see that we bring also like the different ministries and for NDCs together? Because, we have construction ministries typically in a country. We have Ministry of Environment, which are setting the NDCs overall, the framework very often. And then we have like cement and steel is usually part of the Ministry of Industry, something like that. So how do you see that to bring together? Yeah. And then also, and a second question, maybe to you or to all, we have the roadmaps, and then we have the NDCs, but countries are also increasingly coming up with their long-term low-emission strategies. So I know from Germany, this is like a critical policy element as well. So how how do you see also the linkage between this long-term low-emission development strategies and the roadmaps? Yeah.
Sorry, I've forgotten the first part of the question. Can you repeat the first part of the question again? Sorry,
Yeah, the different ministries.
Oh, the ministry. Sorry, of course. Yeah. So that's challenging. It's always a challenge, and I think I'm trying to think of examples like where we can kind of speak to successes. What my experience in terms of like advocacy towards government is usually towards the European Commission, and there's different what they call like DGs there. And what I found, it was almost up to you as a person advocating for something to help them connect the dots, because they are working in such structured silos that it's hard to kind of facilitate that. And that's something I kind of hear a lot, I think, from the GBC network as well. To bring them together is difficult, but actually going back to like where your common anchor points are, I think the roadmaps actually facilitate that process as well, so that you can say, okay, well, but I also think there needs to be some sort of a kind of ministry that's looking at bringing everything together in each country, but like I'm not going to be able to change that myself.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. It's just really interesting to make that point. So in the climate resilience roadmap, as I said, half of that is directed at the political audience. So adaptation in the UK is dealt with by 8 different departments. And because lots of people own it, nobody owns it. So it's really messy the way it's dealt with in the UK. So one of the political recommendations that came out of the roadmap is that we need an Office of Climate and Nature in the UK, which would sit in the Cabinet Office, which is basically the bit that the Prime Minister directly oversees. And the logic is, without that overarching oversight of how all the different climate responses, especially in adaptation, come together, we're never going to get that sort of collective endeavour. And I think it's just worth putting in reference. So the UK new NDC commitment that came out this week is for an 81% reduction by 2035, so very ambitious. If we can deliver against that, that's deeply impressive. But if I think of Anne's space around embodied carbon and the impacts there, in 2035, embodied carbon becomes the biggest impact in the built environment in the UK. It overtakes operational emissions. Yet at the moment, there's close to zero awareness about what it is in the UK. We don't measure it. There's no requirement to report it, and there's no regulation or policy to limit it. So, we've got these very, very ambitious targets for 2035. There's a lot of work to be done now, looking at the granularity of the plan to get us there on adaptation and indeed, material embodied carbon limits.
Yeah, fantastic, Simon. I wanted to come to that point because in Germany we're at the same stage. There are countries in Europe like Denmark and Finland and so on, which have like specific targets, like kilograms CO2 per square meter over the lifetime of a building. How important do you think these targets? And maybe also to Anne, a question then, how do you see that implementing of those targets in developing countries, which I think is, we have not even addressed it in like developed countries sufficiently. How do you see that possibly developing in developing countries?
Yeah, I'm just back from Copenhagen 2 weeks ago, and it was slightly embarrassing how far ahead the national codes and the behaviour of mainstream industry is versus what we're used to. And again, I come to the point that in 10 years, that's the lion's share of the impact of our built environment in the UK, and we're just not aware of how to deal with it. So it's really challenging, but I'll hand over to Anne to talk on the detail.
Yes, we also have the example of France in this term, the RE 2020, where explicitly they have some levels of CO2 per square meter, but they differentiated the operational emissions and the embodied emissions with maximum for low-rise building for until 2 floors, and another objective for high 6 or 7 floors. I think it's a good idea. I think it's implemented, but bringing that into Africa, that will be a challenge, because we first need to have all the methodology of calculation in place. We need to have the material ready. This is in progress, but you have to understand that the cement industry is very fragmented. A lot of international companies are very present everywhere in the world, but not that much in Africa, which means that in front of us we have sometimes small independent cement producers. And we need to reach them in order to bring this low carbon cement in production and thus in use. So there is a lot of knowledge sharing there, how to bring that in order to be able to implement one day later this example of RE 2020.
Yeah, so I think it's very challenging. So many things have to come together, and we have to do things in parallel because time is of importance. So if there are any more questions from the audience, please let us know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more a comment than a question. Is that I think we need to really separate these embodied and operational emissions. I was surprised that in the UK, even embodied is overtaking operational, but when you go to the global south, the heating requirement is almost nothing, and embodied becomes even more important. And the point is it's up front. So when you do whole life cycle analysis, you tend to lose the importance of embodied energy immediately in these years to 2050, which is only like 25 years now. So, this is why I think there is advantages to keeping them separate and focusing on how we can bring down those embodied energies. And there are a lot of strategies, but as Anne said, you have to have the good metrics. So that's also where we're working to develop simple metrics that can be used in developing countries for embodied emissions.
Great. Maybe you can also briefly introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Karen Scrivener, professor at EPFL in Switzerland, and as well as the LC3 project, we're also running what we call this Global Building Data Initiative to, as I say, develop simple tools for calculating embodied energy in buildings and structures around the world.
Simon wants to say something. Just before Simon, I have a follow-up question, because in my view, energy efficiency targets are somehow easy relative to embodied carbon, because they're the owners, the building developers and so on, or the owners mostly, have something to gain because they have less energy consumption. If you want to have them low carbon steel or cement, it's much more difficult because you gain less. Yeah? So how, maybe to you, but also to the others, how do you see that overcoming that? Yeah.
Well, I think you don't necessarily gain less, because when you look at the levers for concrete, then you gain a lot because you save costs. So yes, steel low carbon does always mean higher costs, but for concrete, no, that's not the case. It can be a lot cheaper. So I wouldn't say you can't gain things.
So there's a bright spot for LC-free cement. Yeah, good. Okay, Simon, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. We need to be cognizant of the different requirements of operational and embodied separately, but then obviously understanding the joint pathway they follow. So when we did the whole life carbon roadmap, which generally speaking is about taking a trajectory downwards to 2050, in the last 5 years of this decade, that roadmap shows a blip upwards, and that's when we start accelerating on the retrofit of our buildings, but before we've got good low embodied carbon products. So basically, we're going to be starting on the decarbonisation retrofit pathway before we've got enough knowledge and material and products in the system. So, we're trying to recognise that and sort of look at them separately to get the intelligence and intellect into the process, but then understanding how they interplay with each other. And I think I always think of this as well in the 80% problems that in the UK and most of Western Europe and the global north, 80% of the buildings that we'll have in 2050 already exist. Therefore, it's a retrofit challenge primarily. In the global south, 80% of the buildings in 2050 have not yet been built. So it's a new development and infrastructure challenge. So I think one of the real key things in all of this, and it's the work that Global ABC and World GBC and UNOPS and lots of others are facilitating, is the knowledge sharing we're going to need, not just between countries, but pan-continentally, to make sure that we're learning from each other's successes and mistakes if we're going to scale this and deliver at the speed required.
Yeah, I think that's it's a really important point and one to be really cognizant of, because there's no one size fits all solution. And one of the things that struck me was we've been advocating to the European Commission for a very long time. You need to address whole life carbon and using it at that level. And then when they did address whole life carbon, they came to us and they're like, well, how are we going to actually implement this? And we talked with our network, with all of the experts that we convene in Europe, and actually like you say, we did break it down into that operational and embodied, but then an overall whole life carbon. But you do need to break it down and understand that piece, and then you can put it back together. But you also need to look at them separately. So that kind of comes out once you start getting into the details, is what I find. And I think as well when you're looking then at the global south and how you are going to address embodied, I think that will be a really important conversation, and to understand the different perspectives, because there are different perspectives on that. But I'd love to hear more about your insights on that actually. So.
Yeah, maybe. I think that's a good point. Basically, like, doing the roadmaps, doing the targets is important. It's essential. But then basically, how do we go to the implementation? And maybe, Anne, you can give us a little bit more experience. Like, you already pointed at some of the challenges,
Yes.
especially like the informal sectors. From your experience working with the countries, where do you see moving that ahead in developing countries?
Yes, true. Our implementation strategy will be totally different than an implementation strategy than Global North. Here in Global South, we need to understand what are the needs. Who are the builders? Because when we look at the informal sector, that are building their own houses, those are young people. So what we need to bring is how to build differently to young people. It's not through universities. It will be through universities for the future. Designers, architects, structural engineers, that is for sure. So this is one part that EPFL would like to tackle with exchange of professor in Global South University. Second is how do we bring this knowledge into these young people. So we are working on a new strategy to catch their attention, and like every young people, we will try to do it by a project Build Better through all the social media. As simple as that, because every young person on the ground that is building their own house have social media. It is one way, but it's at least something that we could reach very easily and massively. And then we also looking at, we will take the example of India, how to optimize concrete, and we'll bring some of the solution that India found in order to accelerate the efficiency of concrete and not losing everything on the ground or having an issue with the quality, bringing that also in Africa, trying to have the experience of India and bringing in Africa. And this is somehow the implementation we try, because we have to see that 80% of the building that will happen now are really in rural or sub-rural area, and those are self-built masons, if I can say.
You had this chart with the waterfall chart where like the first step, so decarbonizing cement, maybe and I think the bar on the right was CCS, or was that?
At the end, that's the delta, which I don't name CCS because CCS is not affordable. It's not now. So we need to work really on the other levers massively in order to reduce what will be one day the delta to capture and store.
So every country is different, we know, but what would be your steps for decarbonizing cement, and then how to bring that into buildings?
Cement is very easy. Very, very easy. We go down with a clinker factor, reducing the clinker content in cement with the cementitious material. And the rest is easy because it's at the plant level. But at product level, really reducing and changing the cement we are selling, and then we need to bring into the market by standardization, adaptation, and building codes, because sometimes they are all linked. The cement standards are linked with the concrete code, are linked with the building code, which means that if we change one, it has to be reflected everywhere in order that construction companies are allowed to use this low carbon cement. And not that we produce and that nothing happens.
Okay.
So everything has to happen at the same time.
Yeah, so it's making the concrete, it's the LC-free, and then bringing that into building codes and industry codes and
because
standards.
at industry level, we have to know that the kiln efficiency, we master it. And now in Africa, we have majority of somehow very modern kiln, which is somehow the level of efficiency of the kiln itself is minimal. It's really before that will happen.
Any more questions from the audience or any more remarks from the panelists? Okay, so if there are no more remarks, then I would like to give the closing remarks over to Lea Rinalder, Specialist Sustainable Cities, UN Habitat. Maybe you can say more about yourself, and then we're waiting, very happy to have your closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Oh. Good morning. It's still fine to say good morning. Thank you so much for this amazing panel. Pleasure to be with you here this morning. I'm Lea Rinalder from UN Habitat, working on climate diplomacy and, as I guess you can guess, cities and on multi-level climate action. Specifically, I wanted to reflect a little bit on buildings and cities, as I think most of you probably live in and around a city, and we also know that most buildings are in and around cities. And then to also get you excited about the NDCs and the opportunities that exist on cities and NDCs and buildings, and how we can really use this COP29 and the NDC revision process as a big opportunity. If we're currently looking into where we stand with the NDCs, I think we can all agree that neither are they sufficient nor are we on track of achieving them at all. But we have a big opportunity happening right now. It's the NDC revision process. I just came from an interagency meeting on the NDCs and what we can do to make sure that they're the most ambitious and implementable afterwards. So really exciting to see all these different efforts underway. Cities are currently not being anchored in the NDCs sufficiently. Last week, for those of you who are in that city space, we had the World Urban Forum happening in Cairo just a week before. Don't ask me who planned this back to back, but one thing that's amazing about this is at the World Urban Forum, everything is, of course, about cities. But from all the events that were submitted and held at the World Urban Forum, climate action was the most popular one. So it's actually really interesting that in the city space, the climate debate has 100% arrived. In the climate space, the cities debate maybe not quite as much. Only a bit over a quarter of the NDCs make reference to strong urban content and urban priorities. Although if we've seen the floods, the landslides, the heat waves, they're really often happening in cities. And it's the urban poor who are hit the hardest. I mean, I always say, I live in Nairobi, and we had the floods there recently, devastating floods. Which were the parts of the cities that absolutely got flooded and where people had to be forcefully evacuated? It was the informal settlements. It was not the people, I mean, there was also some people affected living in the richer neighborhoods, but it was the informal settlements, most of them. So that link between cities and NDCs and also where we live is incredibly important. So what can we do? Bring cities to the table. I mean, I think it should not only be cities, it should also be a whole other constituency. The table is big enough. It's not about pushing other people out, but to say that this table is big enough for all of us to collaborate. And why does it matter? I'm not saying that the NDC is the perfect engagement mechanism, but I've also talked with a couple of investors, and they said, for us, in order to invest, we want to see that this priority is anchored in the NDCs. So if it's written in the NDCs, there is an opportunity to invest in it. It can it can, if properly written, if properly implemented, can really help as a tool to attract finance. And if there's, of course, then a mechanism to make this NDC development process inclusive, with different stakeholders, with different participants, different perspectives being included in there, cities, building, construction, private sector, it also can help to then make sure that afterwards we can implement it together. The preparation process is important, the implementation process much, much more important. And we need to make sure that this is implementable. One more favorite statistic, and then I'll wrap it up, is I think you're not surprised that almost all of the NDCs, the current ones, refer to the need for climate finance in order to implement them. Almost none of them refer to the need for urban climate finance. And that's where we have a massive, massive investment gap happening and seeing that right now. So again, the opportunity. What can we do? Understand which policies we currently have in place at the national level, at the local level, at the sectorial level. Collaborate, come together, write these NDCs together so that they can be then implemented together. And what can we offer? I mean, I think, I hope Gulnara already spoke about the subnationals group on buildings under the Global ABC, where UN Habitat is a very proud partner, together with many other groups. We're really looking into how can we break it down, the buildings conversation, to the subnational level. And there is an unprecedented effort right now undergoing by the entire UN system, but not even only the UN system. I'm calling it the extended UN system, family and friends, to support parties in the NDC revision process, to really say, here are the tools, here are the resources. We're here to support you if you want to know how to make your NDCs the best that they could be. And I want to pick up one point that you mentioned before, is communication on social media. I think if we talk about this, I mean, communicating about the importance of climate action, communicating what we can gain with climate action is so critical. I used to work on energy quite a bit, and I always used to say, I mean, these fossil fuel companies have amazing advertisement. It's not about, oh, here we're burning oil to heat your home. It's about family, warmth, sitting together over dinner and a cup of tea. The renewables will show you what you can do with a solar cooker. I mean, this has, of course, changed, but it's about, I mean, we want to tell people what they can gain with climate action and what they can gain also with action in the different sectors. So maybe some ideas of what we can do about buildings and construction. I think there's also still something that can be done to make that really tangible for people. Transport sector, same thing. We see all these amazing advertisements about fast cars, efficient cars, fuel-efficient cars, in beautiful colors. What can we do to bring that conversation also to the buildings and construction level? I'm ready to brainstorm. That was just a side note. Last but not least, I've been asked to talk about another topic that I personally love, which is procurement and the opportunities that procurement offer. It always sounds like a little bit of a nerdy topic, but it's such a powerful thing if we use it right. Public procurement is it needs almost 30% of GDP in many countries, so it's an incredibly powerful tool if implemented correctly and with a sustainability in mind to use this. So there will be the launch of the global framework for action that marks the start of a global push to make near zero emissions and resilient buildings the standard by 2030 through public procurement. And it's really about empowering governments, leveraging the influence of public procurement to drive this low emission, net zero construction practices that do align with our global goals. With this perspective in mind about life cycle analysis and the pathways that local and national stakeholders and collaboration between all of them can do. There will be an event. I think there's hopefully a slide on that. But there will be a launch event. The clicker, the infamous clicker. There we go. Sorry. Well, you can scan it afterwards, but there will be a launch event happening on the 19th at 4 p.m. You can scan the QR code if you're also as passionate about public procurement as I am, and join this event on the 19th at 4 p.m. about sustainable procurement. So please join us, and with that, thank you very much.
Many thanks, Leah. Many thanks to the panelists. Yeah, many thanks, Leah. Many thanks to the panelists. Many thanks to all the speakers, and many thanks to the audience for your great engagement. Thank you.